We've moved in the discussion now from gathering hunters all the way to agriculture, and I'd like to pull one or two threads with us as we tie this up. One of the shifts that occurs is in the relationship with the habitat, from relating as a part of the habitat to relating as in control of, with the illusion of control over or dominance over the habitat. Another relationship that shifts is in the way that human beings relate to each other, from the paradigm of hunter-gatherers and horticulturists being focused on appropriateness and balance and harmony. Would you talk about what happens in agricultural societies in terms of how people begin to relate to each other, not just to the habitat, and also what happens to ritual in terms of horticultural societies?
In the transition from horticulture to agriculture, of course, you have a shift all across the board. Social changes never involve just one factor. There are always complete shifts, discontinuities, actually. And what happens in the transition to agriculture is an establishment of hierarchy, that you all of a sudden have a lower and a middle and an upper. You see that in the way the alternate reality is peopled, where you have a dominant god and then other deities or saints or angels or whatever surrounding and then going down the ladder. And parallel to that, it correlates with that. You also have the dominant hierarchy, the dominant group of people that give orders to everybody else, and that kind of trickles down, the original trickle-down scheme, right? But at the same time, there's also a change in relations between humans among themselves. The father is the absolute ruler over the children, for example. The children are not egalitarian anymore. He has power of life and death over the children. And also the woman's role changes radically. In fact, our position has deteriorated ever since we left the hunter-gatherer-hunter scheme of things. And people don't even see it, except our Indian friends see it. Or maybe they don't see it and I see it. I don't know what's going on. I was at a meeting that had been organized by American Indians, by of various tribes, Navajos, but they were the guests of Pueblo Indians this past summer. And they had done it in such a beautifully tolerant way. They gave everyone a chance to talk. And the theme that they wanted to propagate, the Indian organizers, was the grandmothers. The grandmothers are talking. Well, it wasn't always the grandmothers who were talking. We had a guest from the Sikhs. And the Sikhs are a Hindu sect, and they have ashrams all over the country. And there is one very close to the Pueblos in New Mexico, so practically our neighbors. And they very kindly, American Indians are so wonderfully polite and so conscious of social interaction. Being neighbors, these Sikhs were also invited to speak at this meeting. So the head, how should I call it, the main guru of this group came, a very tall, imposing man, and he had a number of subordinates, and it was obvious that they were subordinates with him, and a group of women. So he spoke in a rather rather patronizing way, saying that all humans, and we particularly, were subject to stress, and that he was going to give us a wonderful boon, a wonderful gift. He was going to give us a meditation with which we could escape stress. And then he went through a very simplistic kind of stress of meditation where you basically said, "I'm fine." And then that was the end of his speech. After he was done with his speech, he turned around, went back to his subordinates. A woman came, picked up his water glass, and obediently followed him. Now, this was a beautiful image of what happens in agriculturalist society. The man surrounded by his male supporters, and the woman in a subordinate role allowed to pick up his water glass. Right after that came a brother and sister couple from the youths, hunters by tradition. He had he had a staff, a talking staff in his hand, and she had eagle feathers in her hand. He spoke to the topic of having to be good to the earth. She spoke about having to be good to the earth, and she spoke longer than he. And there was no her tripping behind her brother picking up his water glass. Mm-hmm. I always remember this little scene as the most wonderful illustration of what happened in agriculture. Mm-hmm. But it didn't just happen in agriculture. There are also nomadic pastoralists around. Nomadic pastoralists are very complicated because there are several different types of nomadic pastoralists depending on where they come from. Do they come directly from hunting? Do they come from agriculture being pushed out into the infertile areas?
And you're saying nomads and pastoralists, people that split off from horticulturalists and hunters and began to live focused on controlling and herding and domesticating animals rather than domesticating plants and fields. Mm-hmm.
That's correct. They either attach themselves to existing herds coming directly from hunting, then their religious life is quite different. But if they live in symbiosis with agriculture, then it's a different picture. Mm-hmm. And in a herding group, you have the tent unit, which is the extended family, and the father is the absolute ruler of the entire group. He has to be, because of the harshness of the environment in which these kinds of herders live. And this is where monotheism comes in. Mm-hmm. We have to think of this, have to consider this, because they gave rise to Islam, mm-hmm. and some of the elements of the Hebraic tradition also got into Christianity. So we have to understand that this is once more a reinforcement of the strictest kind of hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And when we get to the city, now we women have to understand what kind of historical background there is in the attempt of continually trying to rule us.